Chapter 16. Long before John and Sam could see the train through the trees, they could hear its rumbling and its occasional whistle. The closer they got, the more John picked up the pace. Each time, to John's pleasant surprise, Sam was always close behind. John didn't realize that Sam had his own reasons for getting to the train. Every so often, on an early Sunday before church, Sam would feel a gentle shaking at his bed and wait to see his father over him. His father was a tall, slender man with a stern look but an easy laugh. On these early mornings, Sam knew they were headed to the tracks. Sam didn't know how, but his father always had perfect timing. They would step out of the trees at the side of the tracks just before the engine would churn by. They would wave at the engineer, and the engineer would blow the horn, making Sam hold his ears. His father would laugh. Sam learned all about trains from his father. Sam knew they shoveled coal into the burner to make enough heat for the steam. He knew the huge train cars were heavy enough to just lay on the wheel assemblies, without any additional bolts. His father had told him how the wheels were forged at angles so they wouldn't derail when going around corners. On one hand, it was all quite simple, a powerful engine pulling the cars like a horse pulling a carriage. On the other hand, there were hundreds of pieces that had to be tuned to work together. Sam found it exciting. The workings of the train were one thing, but even more, Sam looked forward to the stories his father would tell. In these stories, his father hopped from train to train all up and down the rails, as far north as Boston and all the way down to the bayou. Even more exciting, his father had promised to do the same thing with Sam one day. In fact, his father would still be doing it if it wasn't for Sam's mother. His father told him Sam's mother was someone worth staying in one place for. Even so, his father couldn't help but sit and steal a look at the trains chug by from time to time, just to feel the rumble of his past. Sam and John popped out of the trees just as the train made its way past them. Perfect timing. Sam excitedly made a break toward the tracks. All he could think about was his father's stories and how he wanted to make some of his own. He was gathering speed to jump on when he felt John grab his arm and slow him to a stop. "Easy there," John said. "Not this one. It's headed the wrong way." Sam looked up and down the tracks. It was, indeed, headed south. "We want north, huh?" asked Sam. "That's right, north," answered John. Sam took a breath. He had been excited to finally catch a train. He hoped the next one would be headed in the right direction. For now, all Sam could do was be patient and wait. As the train chugged past, John started north. "Once it passes, we can walk the tracks until the next one." The caboose of the train finally clanged past them, and John stepped sideways into the middle of the tracks. Sam balanced on one of the rails, feeling the subtle rumblings that matched the sound of the train fading into the distance. He counted his steps as he walked, trying to stay atop the rail as long as he could. He surprised himself by getting well past 100. He finally lost his balance at 173, further than he ever got before. He jumped back on the rail and started counting again. John jumped up onto the other rail. Sam broke the silence. "Trains are coming through all the time," Sam offered. "Is that right?" John was happy that this silence was shorter than the last. "If they go one way, they gotta come back and go the other, right?" Sam asked. John couldn't argue with Sam's logic. "Guess we just have to wait for the other," he said. "Guess so," Sam replied as he whispered his step count on the rail again. 23, 4, 5. "It's good news for us, isn't it? Waiting's easy." John pondered for a moment. "You been on a train before?" "Not yet," Sam replied. "Pa always said he'd take me." Sam's footing slipped off the track. He stood for a moment, looking down. He swallowed, took a deep breath, and stepped back up onto the tracks and started counting again. John stayed silent, and Sam got all the way to 42 before talking again. "Suppose I'm going to miss church." "Suppose," replied John. "Unless they got a preacher on the train." John knew the more Sam talked, the easier this change to his new life would be. Yesterday, Sam's life was as normal as any other. Today, Sam had woken up without his family. John knew one of the best ways to quiet and comfort the mind was to condense feelings and thoughts into words, even if those words didn't make much sense at the time. Sam could talk them, write them, sing them. It wasn't important how he got them out. It was just important that he did. All Sam needed was someone to listen, to simply be a witness, and John had plenty of time for that. Most great men kept a journal as a practice. Often what can't be said can be more comfortably written. As such, all the men at the lumber camp wrote things down on a regular basis, at least whatever they felt was worth writing about. For Sam, that meant he had a duty to keep his family's history alive. Sam's memories would fade, as memories do, but words on a page remind us of times long past and lessons long learned. John had brought a stack of blank pages to chronicle the journey. He had already added an estimate to the miles he and the Raven had traveled, as well as mentioning the fire in the farmer's barn with the simple line, "Helped farmer release stock from barn fire." John didn't know if Sam could read or write. If needed, John would do the listening and the writing as long as Sam was willing to do the talking. Both would be easier if they could sit for a bit, while still making progress north. The train would be good for that, once they actually got on one. For now, John let the silence breathe while they walked. A good hour or two later, Sam started to think that waiting on a train only made them come by slower. When he was working at the plantation or helping around the house, it seemed he would hear them in the distance all the time. But he had made it past 100 steps several times and even past 200 steps twice, and still there was no train. This is like watching a chicken lay an egg, he thought. He had tried to watch a chicken lay an egg once when he was younger, had spent all day, in fact, staring at the chicken coop as one of the hens made circles and pecked all day. He even rushed through dinner only to find that the egg had been laid while he was away. As they walked the tracks, every so often they would cross a road, and Sam would wonder if they would leave the tracks and take the road instead, but John always kept to the tracks. Dusk was offering her orange hue to the sky when John turned to Sam. "We'd best find a spot before the moon shows itself." John stepped from the middle of the tracks off to the side and quickly scouted a place to set up camp a few yards into the bushes. As Sam collected a few branches for a fire, John pulled Soup's cookies from his satchel. "You're lucky I kept myself from eating these," John said with a smile. "It's not often Soup makes cookies." Sam was sure he'd never tasted anything so delicious in his life. They were somehow both salty and sweet, with cinnamon and small pieces of bacon. They were also dense and filling. Even after walking all day, one was enough to fill his belly for the evening. "We going to camp all night?" Sam asked as he chewed. "Hopefully not. We're still trying to get the next train north," replied John. He couldn't travel as fast with Sam in tow, and a train was still the best way to make better time than being on foot. The sun dipped under the horizon. John realized he didn't have much time before the moon would rise. John turned to Sam and said, "I'm going to be changing soon. It'll come on when the moon rises." "What do you mean, changing?" John knew this moment had been coming, and he wanted to do right by Arthur. He stood up, rubbed his hands together, and suddenly wished he had more time to prepare. "So, lots of things change as they grow," he started. "You know how a tadpole turns into a frog?" "Yes, sir," Sam nodded. "They lose their tails." They do. Good. And caterpillars turn into butterflies." "Exactly." John took a deep breath. This was going well. "Those changes are like magic, changing from one thing to another, right?" "I guess." "And people go through changes too. Some of us go through really big changes as we grow up. Mighty big." Sam was pretty sure his pa already gave him this talk, but he didn't want to interrupt. "Matter of fact, I'm going to be changing." Sam thought maybe this wasn't the same talk. "You know how an animal changes into another animal?" John continued. Sam nodded. "I'm going to be changing into another animal too." Sam stared at John. He tried to imagine a 6-foot butterfly, but that just seemed silly. So he asked the only logical thing he could. "Are you going to turn into a frog?" John stared. Damn it. He realized that he needed to take a straighter line to get to the truth. "Do you remember me from last night?" John asked. "Sorta," Sam replied. "I saw you skinning the wolf." You did. I was also there when the men surrounded you." Sam looked John up and down. "You did that to those men?" John nodded. The top of the moon peeked over the horizon. John pulled off his shirt, revealing a large, mangled scar on his shoulder that led up to the base of his neck. It looked markedly similar to Sam's arm and leg. He kicked off his boots. Sam felt a stir within him. like something was producing a great tugging from his insides and was trying to get out. The pelt of the wolf slithered up and around Sam, gently applying a pressure all around his body. The moon rose into the night. John dropped to all fours and grit his teeth hard while his back arched and a low growl escaped his throat. Thick fur grew rapidly from the scar on his shoulder and spread to the rest of his body. John got both taller and thicker, his hands extending into claws, and the bones in his ankles and feet shifted longer and wider. Sam thought he had imagined the beast last night, but there in front of him, he watched John transform. Sam was mesmerized. He didn't know why, but he wasn't fearful at all. Instead, he was astonished, and even a little jealous. "Way better than a frog," he whispered aloud. Sam's pelt loosened its squeeze and eased to the ground. John stood even taller than before. Dark brown fur covered his entire body. His long snout ended in sharp ivory canines. His feet had become long, powerful claws. He turned to the moon and let out a howl that echoed over the trees and through Sam's body. The raven landed on his shoulder. John tilted his neck from side to side, smiling after the pleasant crack. His pelt slithered up and around him, a lively, mobile kilt. "There we are," John exhaled. "Good thing you took off your shoes," Sam said, wide-eyed. John chuckled. Sam reached out and touched John's arm. The hair was coarse. "What does it feel like?" asked Sam. "Itchy," quipped John. Sam walked a circle around him. "The inside is worse than the outside." John's voice was deep and more gruff. "Probably because of last night." He saw the wheels turning in Sam's head, putting together both parts of John. The part that had journeyed with him all day, and the part that had saved him last night. "You know what part of us is the most human?" "The talking?" Sam offered. John put his hand on Sam's shoulder. "It's the mistakes that we make, the regrets. Every time the moon comes, you feel all of them. Remorse helps you keep control. It connects to your human part when you're not so human anymore." A blister of regret swelled inside Sam. If he had woken up earlier, or gotten there sooner, maybe, just maybe, he could have saved his family. John continued. "I could have killed those men last night. Easily. I tried not to." John sighed. "When you turn into the wolf, it's easy to kill people. And you shouldn't." John sighed again. "Last night, I changed their lives, but not their minds. Last night, I changed their lives, but not their minds. I did what I had to do to save you, but violence has consequences." Sam didn't know that John was thinking about the death of Sam's family, too. In fact, John had wanted to stay and avenge the deaths of Sam's family. Had it not been for Sam himself walking away from the ashes of his own home, John would have been more than happy to finish what he had started. Last night, he had one mission above all: protect Sam. Even with John's incredible restraint, there had been bloodshed. He knew repercussions would be likely and swift. He just didn't realize how swift and how devastating for Sam. A silence hung between them, against the sounds of the fire crackling. Squawk! The moonlight caught the raven as it landed on the top of a large oak behind John. Sam heard the whistle of another train far in the distance. John turned his massive head and pointed his ears to the south. "That's us," he said. "We'll have to be careful. Generally, it's bad to be seen with me looking like this." John picked up his boots and shirt and kicked dirt on the fire. Sam was anxious to catch the train and broke through the tree line toward the tracks. "Easy there." John gently pulled Sam back into the underbrush. "We don't want the train conductor to see either of us. Wait for the engine to pass." Sam could hear the rumbling getting closer and closer, and with it his excitement grew. He remembered his father telling him that jumping onto a train took skill, speed, and patience. If you made the smallest mistake, it could literally be the death of you. He felt confident he wouldn't let his father down. Soon, the light on the locomotive zoomed by, and John and Sam carefully stepped forward. The wind from the cars came in bursts, matching the clickety-clack and the shrill cry of metal on metal as the wheels slid over the tracks. There was no other light from any of the train cars. "Freight," John remarked. "Perfect." His eyes scanned down the side of the train. "He's moving quick. We're going to have to pick up some speed before we make the jump." "We're jumping on a train?" Sam asked. "I'm jumping on a train. You? I'll probably have to throw you." Throw? Sam thought. "Here we go." John started to run with the train. Sam surprised himself by keeping pace alongside John. Fast as they were, they still weren't fast enough to match the speed of the train. Sam felt John's clawed hand on his back, gently pushing him to go even faster. Sam's feet were moving so fast he was on the verge of toppling over. "Get ready," John yelled as an open boxcar approached. Sam felt the back of his trousers slide up his butt crack and his feet left the ground. He was airborne, heading face first toward the moving train, arms reflexively outstretched to brace for the impact. Just before slamming into the side of the train car, a large open cargo door appeared before him. He somersaulted through it and tumbled to a stop. A second later, the beast that was John landed upright on his feet in the open door of the boxcar. John's pelt got caught on the latch, and several loose pages from his journal flew out of the train. "Damn it," John said under his breath. Amidst the commotion, John spied a shape in the corner of the boxcar. A hobo sat up from underneath a pile of hay and burlap sacks and looked at both John and Sam. The moonlight made a majestic silhouette of John's beastly form through the open door. The hobo blinked and pulled a bottle of booze from under his blanket. He looked at the bottle, then back at the beast that was John, then back again at the bottle. He raised his eyebrows and shrugged, took a swig, and pulled the burlap back over his head as he laid back down. John chuckled. He took a quick inventory of the almost empty boxcar. A dozen bales of hay, a couple carts of chickens, the hobo. This should do for a while. John pulled a bit of hay down and spread it for him and Sam to sleep on. As he lay down, Sam found his legs tired from a full day of travel. Even with the hay poking him a bit here and there, the rumble of the train quickly soothed him off to sleep. John stepped back to the open door. Judging from the moon in the sky, it was somewhere a little past midnight. He turned and saw Sam wrapped in his pelt, sound asleep. This should help us make good time, John thought. Sam's pelt would continue to help heal his wounds, and it surely would provide comfort, as anything that a man constantly carries does. Still, John knew what was ahead for Sam, and he was unsure how to tell him. He was a man of selective words, and he felt a continued nervousness. John had been ready to teach Sam the tricks of the lumber trade, and even more importantly, how to manage the change when it came time. While being a mentor was one thing, John hadn't expected to be a substitute father for Sam. A father Sam had only lost this morning. John was feeling a growing, persistent pressure. The same pressure one feels when something is deeply important, but there is little time. Just get him home first, he thought. John took a breath and stepped away from the door of the boxcar. He bunched the hay next to Sam a bit, then circled it a few times before settling down. John tried to sleep, but even with the rhythmic rocking of the train, the Sandman was elusive. Eventually he sat up and looked out the boxcar door, watching the woods and the world pass by in the moonlight. After a while, his gaze fell back to Sam, his chest slowly rising and falling as he slept. He's been through a lot, John thought. He reached over and placed a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder, a subtle comfort children often feel in their sleep, but never see. Pulling his hand away, John gave Sam's pelt a slight rub. His own pelt wrapped itself up and over John's shoulders. The rest of the night, John's thoughts were like the world passing by outside, familiar, but unable to calm. In the twilight of the morning, Sam awoke to the controlled sounds of John's transformation back to human form. John was trying his best to keep his grunting quiet. Sam was relieved the hobo didn't stir. Perhaps the drink was still in him. Later that morning, the hobo pushed the burlap aside and sat up. After a few blinks, he could make out John and Sam sitting with their feet out the open door of the car, the amber morning light making them seem almost statuesque. John turned and caught his eye. "Morning. How far this one going?" John asked. "Last stop is the capital, far as I can tell. I seem to have lost my ticket, you know." John gave a chuckle. "Hard to hold on to a ticket these days." The hobo raised himself and came to sit next to John and Sam. As he hung his feet off the side, he brought out the bottle and offered it. "No, thanks," John replied. The hobo looked John up and down, then offered the bottle to Sam. "Him neither," John responded. The hobo looked John up and down again, quickly deducing John meant what he said. More for me, then, the hobo replied with a smile. He took a swig. Tastes same as dinner last night. Sam had heard about fast trains headed all the way to the west coast without hardly a stop, but the trains headed north must have been slower, since it seemed to stop constantly. John wanted to take the train as far as they could, so each time they pulled into a station they would join the hobo in hiding behind the bales of hay until they felt the train clang to life again and they heard the raven squawk from somewhere outside. They must have picked a good boxcar, since all the workers ever did was glance in or pull the door closed from the outside. On a couple occasions, instead of hiding, John jumped out of the boxcar and soon returned with bread, fruit, or some other simple food. To Sam's surprise, he even brought back a new bottle for the hobo. The hobo expressed great gratitude to John for the food, and the bottle seemed to keep him in good spirits. Sam quickly realized it also kept him unconscious when John transformed each evening. Even if he managed to sleep as the sun went down, Sam's scar would awaken him each night with itching and burning. He would open his eyes just in time to witness the last of John's transformation. Just like the waning moonrise, John's change would happen a little later every night. With each change, he would look a little less beastly and a little more like John. Each morning, when the sun rose, he would change back to himself. "That scar itching, burning and such?" John asked one night after he transformed. "Yeah," Sam replied. "Seems a little less each night. Kinda how you seem less, too." "That is how it works," John said. Sam wondered if John meant that his own scar would always be itchy, or if Sam's itchy scar would lead to something more beastly and transformative in the future. Sam made good on his claim of being a good worker. Each morning, he would restack the hay they had slept on, and he'd move the chicken cages around throughout the day just for a change. He'd even use a handful of hay in his hands and knees and sweep out the boxcar from time to time. Sam thought he had a grasp on how much time has passed, but he still wasn't sure if it was the 7th or 8th day when the sun set and they finally saw the distant lights of Washington, D.C. "We should be off before it stops," John said. "Be a lot of people in the train yard." Sam took the hint and helped quickly gather their things. Sam was no longer in any kind of pain. His pelt had literally worked its magic, and Sam's arm and leg only had a shade of a scar left. Now, his pelt folded itself into a shape of a satchel, just like John's, and Sam slung it over his shoulder and stepped to the open door. John gave Sam a nudge as the train slowed. "Ready?" John moved to grab Sam by the back of the trousers again. "I got it!" Sam held his hand up. He figured he'd take his own chances rather than be hauled up by the backside again. He leaned out and tried to find a rhythm as the railroad ties passed by, scanning ahead for a place to land. He stopped and started a few times, gaining more courage each time before he got fed up with his own indecision. No sense in just waiting, he thought. Sam jumped. His feet hit the ground hard, but he kept them moving and managed to run for a few steps before falling forward and rolling his momentum out onto the ground. When he settled and managed to get back to his feet, John was already standing next to him. "You good?" John asked with a chuckle. From close by in the darkening night, the raven squawked laughter at Sam's landing. "We've got places to be," John added. Where they had to be, Sam couldn't imagine. They had just spent several nights on a freight train, making it further north than Sam ever thought he would go. "Toward the lights?" Sam asked. "Toward some friends," responded John. "We should be able to get there well before I'll be changing. Stay close." Sam's pelt shifted and slung itself like a backpack, ready for the journey. John drew his pelt satchel tight and led the way as they left the train tracks behind them and picked up the pace toward the electric lights of Washington, D.C.